Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to spend the afternoon with Allison Morgan from Zensational Kids. I am so excited, Allison. This is like years, years since we've seen each other, and I'm thrilled. And I get your newsletter and I see your name pop up, and I've been meaning to reach out, so I'm so glad we did. And today, I specifically wanted to really talk to you about this intersection of mindfulness and SEL in particular, because it's a hot topic, right? And we'll go into that. But first, before we dive in, I'd love for you to share with the kids in the community here, right? What's your background, Allison? Share with us, people who don't know your incredible work at Zensational Kids. What's your background? What's your passion? And what are you up to now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for reaching out for this. I say reconnection because, you and I have been in this community circle really for a very long time, where some people are just coming to like, oh, mindfulness. Yeah, that's important. And mindfulness with kids in schools. And we've been in it well over a decade, really, really more. So I greatly appreciate you reaching out to reconnect and just share what we're all doing, because being in this field for the past decade, a lot has changed for
A
us.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you a quick synopsis of, how did I come to this work? Professionally, I began working with children right out of school with a degree in occupational therapy, and I specialized in pediatrics. I started work in a school for children that we're going to say special needs, because that has always been the terminology. So it was a specialized school. I went from there to work in a major hospital in Manhattan for many years. And then once my husband and I started having our own kids, I started working in schools. So this is now, before we hit record, I was telling you my oldest daughter is going to be 30. So it's been,
Crazy.
30 years that I've been working with schools, initially just as a staff occupational therapist and then private practice occupational therapist. And about 15 years ago, actually it's probably about 18 years ago now, I found yoga in my own life and I started practicing. And it was an immediate aha, like, why aren't we teaching this to our kids? Like, this is just unbelievable. And
Yeah.
having come from really a dance background my whole life, I always felt that I was very in tune with my body. But having these ancient practices of focused attention, breath, movement, really being able to get in touch with my in the moment, like presence of what is happening within my body, and how these practices were instantaneously changing my visceral and somatic awareness of what was happening. It was an immediate aha. And I really jumped from my mat into my OT practice with my kiddos one-on-one or in small group of like, hey, let's just try this and see what happens. And immediately just like, okay, there's a missing link here of, what we're not doing and what we need to start introducing. And I just little by little, through trial and error of working with my kids, seeing like what works, how can I present this so it's, acceptable, child friendly, and what should be the expectation of how long a child could sit or what they should do. And educators that I was working with were just like, what are you doing with these kids? Because it's so different. They come back so different to class. So it really just led me down this path of, I was always about like, do the right thing, do what works, don't listen to what all the chatter is, because initially the chatter in the school and really in public schools was like yoga, like don't say yoga, what's this breath, you can't do this breath work. And I was very fortunate being an OT. I had my own treatment room, so I could do whatever I want. And as long as I can find the evidence that what I'm doing is working, nobody was questioning me. So it just started there, and then it evolved into forming Zensational Kids, because it got to the point where, all right, I need to teach this to other people. And I was traveling all over the country for many years, like every month, going city to city. training educators and therapists on how to integrate all these practices directly with what they were doing in the classroom. And, really COVID changed a lot of things. For us, we're still figuring it out, and it's okay. I'm thankful so much for what the practices have taught me, myself, and how to handle change, how to handle frustration, how to have a vision of what you want and it doesn't necessarily go the way that you want it, how to meet and greet students and educators where they are, because where they are now is very different than where they were in 2019. It's like we were going step forward, step forward, step forward, and did this huge jump back.
Yeah, right.
So it's really been an interesting ride.
Yeah, I love it. I want to highlight a few things, Allison. We do have similar paths, right? Not surprisingly, right? You've come from an OT. I came from teaching, but we both had that moment of aha when we took our yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
I love that. And I also want to highlight that what you did there was you took your yoga teacher training. So you had your own training experience, right? And you went in with a sense of curiosity of how to bring it to your OT sessions. And I think I would I would say that that is something worth highlighting, the curiosity piece. I think so much now, Allison, that, and I know because worked as a substitute teacher last year, it's so prescriptive in schools right now. There's so much pressure. The curriculum is way too much. It's like someone said to me the other day, it's like trying to put 50 pounds in a 5-pound bag. You know what I mean? It's just the curriculum is too much for the time in which we have with children. So the sense of connection, pausing, I mean, it feels impossible. But it feels like teachers, okay, great. If you want us to integrate yoga mindfulness, I want a prescription. I want a step-by-step. What am I going to do on this day? I want to push and play. It has to be easy. I get that, right? I get it. I don't want to invalidate teachers because I saw it and I get it. However, what you're offering there is having experience yourself and then having some curiosity of how do I put it into my sessions in a natural, relevant way that the children love. They're going to feed off your enthusiasm, right?
Yeah.
But also, the children, so it has to be customized. There isn't a one size fits all. Would you agree?
1,000%. And not only is there not a one size fits all for every child, there's not a one size fits all for every educator. And I think when I say, I felt like in 2009, we had taken a big leap forward and then COVID hit and we took a big leap back. Part of that big leap back is that so much about what happens in education really starts with the educator themselves and their ability to regulate and ground themselves in who they are. And essentially what it is about that self-regulation piece. And before COVID, a lot of our programs were very, very heavy in educator professional development. And our educator professional development was really just about them, not about here are all these things you're going to do with your kids, but notice how you feel right now. How does this practice, this breath, or this meditation, how does it make you feel? Don't worry about your kids. I don't care if you get anything out of this training for your kids. Let's just help you notice how you're feeling and how you're feeling when you behave a certain way. And we were very fortunate that schools that we were working with before COVID really allowed us to spend quality time with their educators in this type of training, which really was like self-care, but it was training in their own self-awareness and self-management. And what ended up happening after COVID, because as you're describing, curriculum became so dense and so bulky and so full, there's just no room for, let me think and let me see, does that seem right to teach that right now? Like, are my kids ready really to learn that, opposed to like,
Right.
I have to teach that right now because it's next.
Yes.
So not only did that happen, but the other thing that happened was there was just less time available for schools to be able to allow educators to get the training that they really needed. So schools were calling me and they're like, I know that's like a full day like training, or that's a 2-day training, or that's a module training. Can you come and can you like do that for in an hour? We have an hour. What could you do
Yeah.
in an hour? I'm like,
Yeah.
well, you know, what do you think you're going to get in an hour?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah. So
It's tricky.
that's
Yeah.
one of the trickiest things,
Mm.
because schools are so heavily focused on how do we get all this information into our
Yes.
kids' brains, right?
Right. Right.
And what they lack the understanding and awareness of is that information does not become knowledge that serves a whole child if we don't take into account the state of the mind and the body when
Mm.
you're teaching. And this is like foreign language to educators. When we talk about like state of the nervous system, they just look at like information, mind, get it in there, executive functions, that prefrontal cortex, like let's get it going. And they don't understand how greatly important awareness of our emotions and our emotional state, and how that sets up our nervous system, and how we as the adult play such a key part without any words being spoken, but just this body presence plays such a huge part in helping our children being able to get ready to be able to receive.
Right, exactly right. And actually, to support that, I just spoke to Susan Drea Leon, who's the director of mindfulness for educators in the Antioch University in New Hampshire. And last week, and she was saying exactly what you said there, that the research is showing they looked at mindfulness programs for children over a number of years. And there's a study she speaks about out of the UK, and the results, the outcome for the children is not super conclusive, but what is conclusive is the impact on teachers. So they're finding practicing mindfulness in classrooms is making a profound effect for teachers' mental health. So exactly what you're speaking there is to start with the teachers. And so when you're thinking about sort of like in your journey working with educators, what are you sort of noticing is sort of the upside when it's easy and when teachers are available, mentally, emotionally, physically, everything to practice themselves and in their classrooms? And then what are you seeing are like the downside of like, the challenges that you're seeing? Sort of what's the kind of the up and the down?
Yeah. So the greatest upside is that the more aware educators are of their own nervous system and emotional state and able to manage that, the greatest ability they have to manage the behaviors in their classroom. And when I say manage the behaviors, is what we see is that for educators that are well regulated, they provide the greatest structure and grounding for their students to regulate or co-regulate with that. So it's not that the educator becomes proficient at managing the myriad of behaviors. There just aren't as many, we'll say maladaptive, because that's the term that educators use, maladaptive behaviors. So often what happens is like this vicious circle. So you have an unregulated educator who is overwhelmed, frustrated, and stressed out, and they're serving children that are overwhelmed, frustrated, and stressed out. The kids start exhibiting uncontrollable behaviors in the classroom that set off other kids, which then stresses out the educator even more, and they energetically feed off of each other, And it just becomes this really vicious circle. Whereas when you have an educator who is aware of their own nervous system state, so I'm not saying an educator who just is so blissful and joyful and calm and that, because
Right.
that's not real, but an educator that understands this wave within, their window of tolerance, what they can tolerate, and when they're out of that window, which we could talk about that if you want to and what all that means. But when they're aware of that, and then they have some tools to use for themselves, whether it's taking a breath, take a step away, asking a child I see you're having a hard time, I will be there in a moment, whatever their tools, having a basket of tools to use, whereas the students know that they have this steady, grounded support that's got their back, that helps them when they become overwhelmed, then that feeds on itself. And it really, what it does is it creates this classroom, this environment of just safety, feeling safe. And that feeling of safety is not only knowing, like in my mind, like I know I'm going to be safe in this classroom, but the body itself as an organism perceives safety and perceives threat. No words need to be stated, right? It's an innate feeling based on what's around them and the energy that's around them. So to answer your first question, the upside is that there are less behaviors in classrooms, and there's greater peace, there's a greater sense of safety, and those are key things that are needed in classrooms for learning to happen. So learning becomes more easeful and teaching becomes more easeful. So the flip side of that, like what are some of the challenges with it, is number one, in order for this to be effective, teachers need to want to do things differently than they've done them before, which is a really hard ask when they feel like they're on their final thread of dealing. Because when you feel like you're on your last thread, you're reverting to all of your survival mechanisms to get you through. Like, I just got to get to the end of the day. So we're really asking them to stop, to notice, and to do something different, which in the beginning takes so much more energy. It's really hard in the beginning, and you have to trust in the process. And it's a really hard ask for teachers. I think more so now than again before COVID, because it's like their nervous system is just fried. And I get it. And the other thing that's sort of a challenge is that for those educators that really do want to try this, there is this belief that if I stop teaching to turn out the lights, say, or stop teaching and just have everybody sit at their desk with their heads down to take a moment, or I have students stopping their work and just doing a couple of breaths, and an administrator passes by and I'm not on that task, I'm going to get written up. They're going to come in, they're going to observe me more. That's more stress. So that's one of the things. And we have schools that really, all of our schools invite us in through administration. So the administrators are asking for this, not the teachers. We don't do onesie twosie things with educators. It's kind of all or nothing. So educators are already aware, if you hire us to come in and work, this is what it's going to look like in your classroom. This is what we're going to be asking them to do. And they're all for it. But educators still have this belief that if I'm actually doing what you're asking, it means I'm not doing all those other things that I'd never
Yeah.
even really get to the end of the list anyway. So how am I going to fit that in? So convincing them that if you do this, you're going to end up with more time because you're not going to be repeating yourself. Things are not going to be so hard. But yes, it's hard in the beginning because you're doing something so new. Anything you do that's new, that's not your regular routine,
Mhm.
it's hard. It takes extra effort.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I've got the devil advocate in my mind thinking for those of us listening who are drowning, quite frankly, right? You say, okay, yeah, but, and all those things you said. And I can see some people thinking, yeah, I'm just trying to get through the day. I'm just trying to get through the year. I'm just trying to get through to retirement. I'm trapped. I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. You're absolutely right that there's people coming, adults coming in and out of classrooms. I mean, back in the day when I was teaching, we didn't have as many support. We didn't have as much support, but also I can see it can work the opposite way where you have all these adults coming in and out all day long, and you're
And it's
just
not so
trying to,
supportive all the
and
time.
it's not always supportive, right? It can be very distracting for some of the students. So, and as you say, you're having one student, you say, yeah, but that child I have, he or she is in my classroom for the whole year and there's nothing I can do about it, right? And those behaviors are so big that they disrupt the whole classroom. Like I can see teachers saying, yeah, okay, I get where I'm trying to go to, but how do I take that next step? What is like the next step? So what are some of those practices that are like your go-to that can help you just be 5% as Dan Harris says, 5% better, as mindfulness. How do I just be 5% more healthy or in tuned or in my body a day?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I always recommend to educators is that they have 3 to 5 minutes in the morning, preferably in their classroom or in their car before they walk into the building. That's just for them. It's just for them to put their feet on the floor, one hand on their heart, one hand on their belly, a couple of like intentional, mindful breaths. And even if they can say something positive to themselves, like today, I'm going to do my best. I'm here, all of me, and I'm here for my kids, and I'm here for me. And I'm going to make sure I take care of me. Whatever you could say to yourself that when you say it, you actually feel better, opposed to you're saying it and it's stressing you out. And really only you know what that is. But I'll never forget when I really started my own meditation practice, my kids were really little. And I used to, drive home from work, working with kids all day in the school. And I had a little hand timer because here we only had flip phones, none of these, but I had like an egg timer. I'd keep it in my car. I would drive down my street. I'd pull over to the side of the street before I'd get to my house. I put the timer on for 3 minutes because I knew when I walked into my house, my kids would be like, Mom,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
never had time to like just shake off my day. So for me, that was my stressful time walking into my own home. But I would 3 to 5 minutes, honestly, sometimes only 2 minutes, but I would just give that time to myself of feel my breath, feel my heart, say a few kind things to myself. My kids are going to be excited to see me. I'm excited to see me. My day from work is over. I did the best I could today. I'm on to the next chapter of my day, whatever I needed to say to myself, so that it was a new me coming through the door. Because no matter what practices we do with our kids in the classroom, nothing is as powerful as how I show up. Nothing, 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 nothing. And what I also say to educators, especially those that are like, I don't know if I could like stop my class and like do these practices. So what I encourage them to do is, do you think that every time you're about to do a transition with your class, whether it's like take out your math books, or now we're going to do centers, or we're lining up to go to this special or whatever, or the bell's going to ring and we're switching over. Can you just stop and ask yourself, like in this moment, like, how do I feel right now? Like, do I feel my feet on the floor? Do I feel grounded? Or do I feel like, just notice how you feel. Don't even have to do anything about it. But just when you notice how you're feeling, notice what's happening around you. Because when you start to connect, like, oh, I feel really good right now. Like that was a good class. Everybody was paying attention. Like it makes me feel really good. Notice what's happening around you. And then when you feel really, really frazzled, notice what's happening around you. Because there's a correlation. There's 100% correlation. So once that starts registering, it then makes people a little bit more curious, like, all right, I see that, like, when I'm really frazzled, this kid is like, I don't even have to say anything, but they're set off, you know? So what happens when I do a couple more of these, you know, and I do really ground myself? What happens? So that's like that's really my first recommendation. Just do something for yourself, notice the difference that it makes. My second recommendation is, yeah, it's really hard to think about integrating these practices throughout the day, like every hour, stop and do 30 seconds of a breath, or stop and do movement. It's really, really hard. And then to be okay with the 30 seconds we didn't do a wrap up of math or reading or whatever. But could you once a day, just once a day, do something and notice how the next 10 minutes are, or the next 30 minutes? Don't do it a million times, just once a day. What happens?
You mean like doing a mindfulness practice, for example?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Take out could you spare 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Could you spare 2 minutes and just see?
You see that, adding a breathing practice during morning meeting, for example, see if that makes a shift. Or when they come back from transition, right? Can you have a couple minutes of silence, right? And just noticing, is that what you mean? Just noticing if that makes any difference.
Like pick something, of course, in all of our, like our curriculum and our online programs, there's, 50 some odd different activities that you could do for a minute to, so pick something that you like. Even pick something that the only outcome is that you feel a little bit better. Forget about what it does to just that you will feel a little bit better. Pick that one. That's where you start. Because that's the other thing. Educators always ask me, like, okay, like I got this whole book of all these practices. Like, where do you start? I'm like, well, do you like?
Right.
Sometimes in a session, I'll just have everybody like in the front row. What did you like? What did you like? What did you like? What did you like? Look at that. They're all different. Guess what? That's what you start with. Just what you like.
Yeah, right. Because there isn't a one size fits all, right? So have you, looking at all those 50 practices that you have in your book, have you had feedback from teachers to say, oh, like, is there a couple that float to the top where
I mean, the ones
common?
that really float to the top are the ones that they're able to do like at their chair, take, not a lot of crazy movement, like hands on the heart, hands on the belly. I would say that's probably like the number one thing for every single age group, like loves that. The other one that they always love is I am taps. So you have an affirmation for yourself, like I am curious, or I am so happy, or I am so calm, whatever that affirmation is that you want to say to yourself, and you tap.
Yeah. So for those listening who are listening to the podcast and they're not
Yeah.
seeing you, so what Allison is doing is just taking each word, tapping a different finger, going down through the fingers. I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And the truth is that both of these practices, when you even just look at the science of what's happening when
Mm.
you're doing that. So for example, a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly really stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is a relaxation mode of your nervous system. Just your hand in those two places signals to your brain and body, you're safe, it's time to calm down. And then when you get into the intricacies of the practice, what you're really doing is as you breathe in, you're seeing if you can fill up your lower part of your lungs and expand the belly first, and then the heart. Because when you expand the belly, the movement of your diaphragm activates your 10th cranial nerve, which is your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is parasympathetic nervous system driven. So that movement of your diaphragm activating that nerve sends a signal from that nerve up to your brain, like everything's great. It's now it's time to calm down. It's all okay. So there's a physiological response that's happening, right, through that practice. And the same thing with putting pressure. So on that the I am taps, when your thumb, the pad of your thumb comes in contact with your index finger, middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. These are mudras, hand positions in yoga. And what we know is that the tips of your fingers are acupressure points to your prefrontal cortex. So it's actually helping you activate that prefrontal cortex to get you ready for learning and for remembering your mantra at a deeper level.
Yeah, I love that so much. So let's think about, I know that your work goes into the SEL, social emotional learning curriculum, right? You're working with educators and it feeds naturally into SEL, right? There's been a lot of research on how those come together. So what I'm hearing from you also is some of the challenges we hear, specifically here in the United States, is, there's a lot of SEL programs that you can buy that districts can buy. They buy them. It's a kind of a push and play or whatever, or here's a download or whatever. But what I'm hearing from you is, some of the issues that people have is, okay, great, there's this curriculum that the district has spent, thousands of whatever dollars on.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds of $1,000s on.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily how to use it for my students. It's not where I'm at, but what I'm hearing from you is using mindfulness integrated into the SEL program, that you're picking and choosing activities that work for you and your specific population, which may change year on year, depending on the needs of where you are at and your students.
It can change day to day.
It can change day to day.
It can change day to day. Yeah.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that the teacher is empowered and inspired to practice their own SEL mindfulness activities, and therefore it integrates naturally. Is that kind of how you've approached adding mindfulness into SEL curriculum?
Yes, and so a lot of the SEL curriculum that's out there, it's very prescriptive and it's very highly analyzed. And, there's checklists and they have to make sure they get through every lesson. And this lesson is to teach this and that lesson is to teach that. I would say our philosophy is, let's get the self-awareness and the self-management in check. And everything else flows naturally from there. So I look at SEL really as like our biological necessity of having those skills, but we need to get the physiology in line in order for those skills to naturally develop. So again, I take a very physiological and a neuroscience approach to how human beings naturally interact, develop, and nurture from the inside out. So that's the big difference. So my philosophy is not, okay, here's a lesson on responsible decision making, right? Really, the heart of our programs is, let's become aware of how we're feeling. Notice how our body like responds to these different feelings. And then notice what tools we have within us to manage that. Because sometimes managing that is, I'm angry and I have every right to be angry. So managing that is, I'm going to deal with this anger, right? But sometimes it's, I'm angry because I feel totally disconnected. I don't feel safe right now. You're scaring me. I'm unsure of what's going on. And I'm just, my nervous system is just a mess right now. So what tools could we use to get that to a more balanced, regulated state?
Yeah. Let's use an example about responsible decision making, right? Or problem solving. This is perfect. I remember when I was subbing, during morning meeting, I would talk to the children about the weekend or whatever, and I would explain situations. I might have said, "Oh, I had this decision on the weekend, and these are the two, and I have my own story that I have trouble making decisions, and I knew I had to just put it aside and go walk away." So I'm modeling without even realizing it. What I do mindfully is to step away from a decision and come back to, take a pause and come back. Or my daughter, all the time, I'm doing this with her, right? That uh, I'll explain to her, okay, here's what, because I've got a very Vata scattered brain and she's
Uh-huh.
not. She's a lot more logical and she can kind of
Yeah.
put it. And so I think, but what you're saying there, instead of a prescribed, here's step one, step two, step three, step four, instead, there's your topic you want to maybe bring up, but you're modeling, here's a real life situation that happened to me yesterday, today, whatever. And here's some of the strategies I used. And ask the children, what would you do in this situation? Right? To have them put themselves in your shoes, right? And have a dialogue. So then it becomes like, oh, here's some other ideas. Oh, and then that's a great idea, so and so. I never thought of that. Maybe I'll try that. So it empowers them, right? Is this kind of what you're talking about, a
Um,
dialogue?
Well, in your
Mm.
example of decision making, having a dialogue is definitely a great real life scenario of how to move through that. I'm really talking more about how when we as human beings have a better awareness of just how it feels in here, what's happening
Yeah.
within the body, and understanding the correlation between what happens in the body happens in the mind, and what happens in the mind happens in the body, and that there are some tools that help us manage all of that.
Mm.
Everything else really does fall into place, because like when we even talk about like social awareness, social interaction and engagement, those are biologically, we want that, right?
Mm.
That those are natural things. But in order for that to flourish, it really has to come from a regulated state. And if you
Mm.
don't have regulated inner states, none of those things are going to develop.
Yeah.
Right. So even when you look at, let's look at responsible decision making, if you start with self-awareness and you have that example of, what's the right decision here? What should you do? But you go back to, well, look at your different options. And when you think about them, how do each of those make you feel?
Mm.
And it could be the example of a child deciding, like, should I steal that lollipop? Like, should I steal because I want that
Mm.
lollipop? Okay, so I could have the decision of like, I'm going to steal and I'm going to hide it, and because then I'm going to get this lollipop. right? All right, so taking that lollipop, how does that make you feel? Well, I feel good because I got that lollipop, right? I get that
Mm,
lollipop. Okay, so how do you feel after you have
mm.
that lollipop? How does it feel? So is that a good decision? Just because of trusting yourself and that emotional awareness of how it feels. Because
Yeah.
your emotions are also always going to be your guidance system, right? For what should I jump into? What should I stay away from? It's your guidance system of like, am I ready to understand this new information, or am I kind of like in panic protection mode, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, so understanding our own like emotions and nervous system inner awareness it's just so key for it's such a foundation
Yeah. Right.
for everything,
That's what
for
it's about, getting
everything.
back to the basics, right? Yeah. So
Totally
of
back to
all,
the basics. I mean, it
yeah,
almost, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's almost
yeah.
like so simple, it seems
Right.
stupid.
Right. Right. Right.
But without it,
Yeah.
we can't learn, we can't
Yeah.
connect, we can't build community. You know,
Mm,
we can't be creative, we can't be curious.
mm,
Like
mm-hmm.
we need a regulated nervous system in order to do
Mm,
those things.
right.
And not that you
It's
need to
like
be
we're
creative.
walking, it's like we're walking around with this just huge junk of noise in front of us, right? That is stopping us from connecting to ourselves, to other people, right? So
Totally.
now you've spent your career traveling, meeting lots of different educators. Have you got a story for us from somebody who maybe was, I don't know, like a cynic or wasn't sure or really
Oh,
struggling?
I've got
And
lots of cynics. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
lots of, I mean,
Is there one story over your years that really stuck out as somebody who made sort of like that transformational leap?
you know what, there honestly, there isn't one that really sticks out, because more often than not, when I'm in a school, we have just as many skeptics as we
Mm,
have hand raisers of I'm in. And just as many schools where those skeptics were like, can I do the training next? Like, I see what's happening in that classroom, and like, I
mm,
actually want that. And I've had, even because we've worked with lots of inner city schools and districts where there's like 25, 30 schools in the district, and we have to hit every school. So where superintendent is totally like on board, not every principal is. So we've had some
mm.
schools where principals were like, go ahead, I don't know how you're gonna do this. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I can't help you out with that. You're gonna have to figure it out. And they do like a full 180. Like, wow, I see what you've done in those
That has
classrooms.
got to take so much courage. I can't
You know,
imagine. Like, I'm a
it,
people pleaser. I mean, I
yeah.
cannot imagine walking into that kind of environment. You're amazing.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have, thank you. I think a lot of people have said that to me, like, how can you be so brave with this? And I think
Yeah.
that, because I've asked myself, like, really, is it being brave? But I come from a background of working with the most challenging students
Mm,
in schools. And when I say most challenging, they're the ones that they want to do their best, but they are like square peg in a round hole. And a lot of them
mm,
cannot advocate for themselves. So I was always the one to say the things that teachers didn't want to hear. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this kid can't say it for themselves. And this is what's going to happen in this classroom if you truly do
mm,
want this kid to succeed. I can't candy coat it. And I don't care if you don't like me for that. Like, shame
yeah.
on you. I don't care. It's
Yeah.
really about helping this. It's about the kid. It's about the student. It's not about
Yeah.
me. So I never, ever, ever took any of it personally. I mean, I've done trainings in schools where I have had educators sit there the whole time like this,
Yeah. like with your hands folded. Yeah. Your
Yeah.
hands. Yeah.
And really my heart goes out to you
Mm.
because you're you're not doing that because of me. You're doing that because you're fed up, because
Yeah.
nobody's really listening to you with how
Mm.
frustrated you are. You're at your wit's end. Nothing's worked. They're asking you to do all these checklists and
Mm.
document this and document that. Like, hey, I don't blame you. Just
Yeah.
sit like that. If that makes you feel better right now in the moment, then you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
And it's not a reflection of me because you don't really know me.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
um
you're so good. You've shared so much. So kind of wrap it up. So what advice do you have, for those educators who really want to add mindfulness into their curriculum, specifically maybe into their SEL curriculum, right? But they just feel completely overwhelmed with where to start. They don't want to add anything more to their plates, as we talked about. And also they have to prove. Usually teachers come to us not from the principals telling them to do this, but they want to do it and they've got to prove it to the administration or to parents. So what
yeah.
is your kind of like your knock the thing out of the park, like what advice, where do people
Yes.
start?
Well, if you're an educator that say you're like,
Mm.
nobody's really helping me, I want to try this because I
Mm.
have to do something. And I don't
Yeah.
need to get approval to do it. I just want to try this. Goes back to what I've been saying this whole time. The first thing to do is take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Notice what you do and what you need in your classroom to give you more moments of you feeling grounded, feeling safe. I mean, maybe it's you have some candies in your drawer, and whenever you feel like you're getting a little flustered, you've got that stash. So then go and
Yeah.
do that and take that and savor that and enjoy that. Maybe it's you have affirmation cards or little messages around that every once in a while you look at. And when you read that, like one or two lines or two words, you're like, oh, that feels better. So
Mm.
just start with noticing what makes you feel, what's in your control. You are in your control. What makes you feel better, steady, grounded, secure, and safe in your classroom, and bring your awareness to it and do it more.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
notice how that is and how
Love
that
it.
changes things. And then the next thing that I would say is find a practice or two that you're very comfortable with, that you would do with your class, or you would do with one or two students when they're really, and I would say don't teach it to them when they're out of sorts or they're overstimulated, but that you feel comfortable doing with them and
Yeah.
teaching them. And just start with that, just one thing,
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah, I love it so much. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Our hearts are connected. We have similar philosophies, similar outlooks, similar
Yeah, yeah.
experiences. I've adored this time together. So how do we
Thank
find you
you.
if our community is looking to connect with you
Yeah,
online? How do we
yeah,
how do we find out
yeah.
more
Best
from
way
you?
is go to our website. We have so many free resources on the website. It's Zensational Kids. So like sensational, but Z for Zen, sensationalkids.com. And we've got free things that you could download. We have videos that you can purchase, but we also have packages that are for free. Just start using them.
I love it. Excellent. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I so
Thank
appreciate
you
you.
so much. And thank you for all
Thank
that
you.
you've been doing in schools and for kids around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison.